Emperor Draxon ruled the stars with scales of obsidian and eyes like molten gold. 300 worlds bowed before the Draconis throne, and his word could end civilizations with a single breath. For 2 centuries he had sat on that throne, watching species rise and fall, watching empires crumble at his feet. He had never concerned himself with the servants who cleaned his palace, who scrubbed the marble floors and polished the crystal windows. Especially not the humans, those strange soft-skinned beings who arrived 20 years ago after their worlds fell to the Empire's might. Humans were background noise to him. They moved quietly through the palace corridors, heads down, never speaking unless spoken to. They were small and weak, breaking easily under the harsh gravity of the palace world. Draxon had seen dozens of them collapse over the years, their bodies simply giving out. The overseers always said it was natural. Humans were fragile creatures, not built for service in a Draconis palace. The strong ones survived. The weak ones didn't. That was the way of things. Tonight, however, something was different. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the royal gardens. Draxon walked alone, as he often did in the late hours when sleep wouldn't come. The gardens were his sanctuary, a place where even an emperor could find peace among the flowering crystal trees and singing fountains. No servants were allowed here. No guards. No advisors. Just silence and starlight. That's when he saw her. A human female lay crumpled beneath the largest fountain, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. The gray servant uniform she wore was torn down the middle, soaked dark with blood that looked black in the moonlight. Her arms were exposed and Draxon's breath caught in his throat. Burns covered her skin from wrist to shoulder, not random burns but geometric patterns. Perfect circles. Straight lines. Deliberate marks that someone had carefully, methodically placed on her flesh. She wasn't moving. Draxon stood frozen for a long moment. Protocol was clear in situations like this. He should activate his comm device and summon the palace guards. They would remove the body, file a report, and by morning the incident would be forgotten. Humans were fragile. They died easily. One more death changed nothing in an empire of trillions. Yet his feet carried him forward instead. He knelt beside her, his massive form towering over her small body even when crouched low. His clawed hand hovered uncertainly over her shoulder, not quite touching. He had never touched a human before. Never had reason to. They were servants, tools, background elements of palace life. But this close he could see details he'd never noticed. The way her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The delicate bone structure of her face. The brown hair matted with sweat and blood. She was still alive. Barely but alive. Something moved in Draxon's chest, something he couldn't name. In 200 years of ruling, he had ordered the deaths of millions. He had watched planets burn. He had destroyed fleets and toppled kingdoms without losing sleep. But seeing this one small human broken and bleeding in his private garden stirred something he thought had died long ago. Against every rule of Imperial conduct, against the voice in his head screaming that this was beneath him, Emperor Draxon slipped his arms beneath the human and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled against his armored chest, and he could feel the heat of fever radiating from her skin. He carried her through the empty palace corridors, moving quickly through shadows. If anyone saw him now, an emperor carrying a human servant like she mattered, the scandal would echo through the court for years. But the palace slept, and Draxon reached his private chambers without encountering a single soul. He laid her on his personal medical platform, the one he used when injured in combat. His clawed fingers worked the control panel, activating scanners that had only ever analyzed Draconis physiology. The readings made no sense at first, human biology was so different, but the trauma was clear enough. Broken ribs. Internal bleeding. Third-degree burns covering 30% of her body. She should be dead. Draxon moved to his private vault, the one containing medicines reserved only for Draconis nobility. Regeneration serums worth more than most planets. He hesitated only a moment before selecting 3 vials of the strongest compounds. The medical system protested. These serums weren't designed for human biology, but Draxon overrode every safety protocol. As the serums entered her bloodstream, the human began to mutter in her fevered dreams. Day 47 of the endurance trial, she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. Subject shows continued resistance. They want to see how much we can take before. Her words dissolved into incoherent mumbling, but Draxon heard enough. His golden eyes narrowed, pupils contracting to dangerous slits. Endurance trial. Subject. They want to see how much we can take. He had never heard a human speak before, not really. They were taught to remain silent in the presence of their superiors, responding only when directly questioned. But her words troubled him deeply, stirring questions he'd never thought to ask in 2 centuries of rule. Who was conducting these trials? Who was testing humans like laboratory animals? And why had no one ever thought to inform their emperor? Draxon stood over the unconscious human, watching her chest rise and fall as the serums fought to save her life. The burns on her arms seemed to glow in the dim light of his chambers, perfect, precise, deliberate marks of torture. For the first time in 200 years, Emperor Draxon wondered if he truly knew what happened in his own palace. The human woman woke 3 hours later. Her eyes opened slowly, confused at first, then went wide with absolute terror when she saw Emperor Draxon standing over her. She tried to sit up, her body jerking in panic, but pain shot through her ribs and she collapsed back onto the platform with a gasp. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean to enter the gardens. I know it's forbidden. I'll accept any punishment you see fit. Just, please don't hurt the others because of what I did. They had nothing to do with it. Please." Tears started forming in her eyes, not from physical pain but from pure fear. She looked around the chamber, taking in the rich tapestries, the golden fixtures, the personal belongings of an emperor. Her face went even paler as she realized where she was. "Be still," Draxon commanded, though his voice came out gentler than he'd intended. The sight of her terror bothered him in ways he couldn't explain. "You're badly injured. Your body needs time to heal. Tell me your designation." The human woman swallowed hard, trying to control her trembling. "Kate, Your Majesty. Serving Unit 739, assigned to the Eastern Wing Maintenance Crew." She looked down at herself, at the medical platform she was lying on, at the healing wraps covering her arms. "I apologize for contaminating your personal chambers with my presence. I know humans aren't permitted in the royal quarters. I should be removed immediately." Draxon felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Contaminating. She spoke the word like it was fact, like her very existence was an offense to the air around her. Like she was dirt that needed to be swept away. "Who did this to you?" He gestured to her arms, where the burns were still visible beneath the transparent healing wraps. "Who marked you this way?" Kate's face went carefully blank, all emotion draining away like water through a sieve. Her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Draxon's shoulder, not quite meeting his gaze. "The training supervisors, Your Majesty. It's standard conditioning. All humans undergo it as part of our service preparation." Conditioning. The word felt wrong in Draxon's mouth, tasted bitter on his tongue. "This is torture. These are deliberate burn patterns. Someone hurt you on purpose." "No, Your Majesty." Kate's voice had gone hollow, rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a script she'd memorized long ago. "We are taught proper service techniques. The lessons help us understand our place and our duties. Some of us are weaker and don't survive the training. That's acceptable. We must prove our worth to the Empire. Only the strong deserve to serve." Draxon had conquered 17 species in his lifetime. He had interrogated enemy commanders and broken resistance leaders. He knew what a truly broken prisoner sounded like, the emptiness in their voice, the death in their eyes. But Kate wasn't broken. Not really. She was performing. Every word was carefully chosen, delivered without emotion, spoken with practiced precision. She was hiding something, protecting something. "These lessons," Draxon said slowly, watching her face. "How long do they last?" 50 days, Your Majesty. If we survive, we're assigned to permanent positions. And if you don't survive?" Kate's expression didn't change. "Then we were too weak to serve. The Empire has no use for weakness." The words came out smooth and automatic, but Draxon saw the tiny muscle twitch at the corner of her jaw. Saw the way her fingers curled slightly against the platform. She was lying. Or at least not telling the full truth. "Who commands this training?" he demanded, letting authority creep back into his voice. "Overseer Torvin and his caste, Your Majesty. They ensure all human servants meet Imperial standards. They've been in charge of the human integration program since the beginning." Torvin. The name meant nothing to Draxon. A mid-ranking Draconis administrator, probably one of hundreds who managed the daily operations of the palace. He had never paid attention to such minor officials. Why would he? An emperor didn't concern himself with who trained the servants or managed the cleaning schedules. But now the name burned itself into his mind, branding itself there alongside the image of Kate's burned arms. "How many humans go through this training?" Draxon asked. Kate hesitated for the first time, a crack in her rehearsed performance. "All of us, Your Majesty. Every human who serves in the palace system." "How many failed to survive?" Another hesitation, longer this time. "I don't know the exact numbers, Your Majesty." "Estimate." "Perhaps 30%. Maybe more." Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. 30%. Draxon felt cold spreading through his chest. Hundreds of humans had died in his palace over the past 20 years, and he had simply accepted the reports that they were fragile, that they broke easily. He had never questioned it. Never thought to investigate. "You will remain here," the Emperor declared suddenly. "In my personal chambers. Until I understand what's happening in my own palace." Kate's eyes flickered with something, fear or perhaps calculation or maybe hope. The expression passed so quickly Draxon almost missed it. "As you command, Your Majesty." "Rest now," Draxon said, moving toward the door. "You're safe here." He left before she could respond, but he heard her whisper just as the door closed behind him. "No one is safe." The words followed him down the corridor, echoing in his mind. Draxon had built an empire on strength and fear. He had believed his palace was the safest place in 300 worlds. But now he wondered if he'd been blind to what was happening in the shadows of his own home. And he intended to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. For 2 days, Kate recovered in Draxon's chambers while he investigated. The Emperor discovered that Imperial authority meant little when facing bureaucratic mazes built over decades. He sent commands to 17 different departments, demanding records of the Human Integration Program. What came back was chaos. Files scattered across multiple systems, each department using different classification methods, different codes, different security levels. Some departments claimed they had no records at all. Others sent thousands of pages of meaningless data. It was intentional, Draxon realized. Someone had made sure these records would be impossible to find. But Draxon was patient and he was angry. The image of Kate's burned arms haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He barely slept those 2 days, spending hours in his private office, digging through layers of bureaucratic nonsense. His advisors noticed the change in him, whispered among themselves about the Emperor's strange obsession with servant records. Let them whisper. He didn't care. He started finding patterns in the chaos. References to something called Protocol 17 that appeared in multiple documents but was never explained. Financial transfers to Overseer Torvin's department that didn't match any official budget. Medical supply requests that seemed excessive for a simple training program. Death certificates signed without proper investigation. The more Draxon dug, the more wrong everything felt. On the 3rd day, deep in the restricted archives that even most administrators didn't know existed, he found it. A file buried so deep it should have been impossible to locate without knowing exactly what to search for. The security encryption was military grade, the kind used for war documents and state secrets. The file name made his blood run cold. Human Acquisition Treaty Actual Terms. Draxon broke through the encryption using his personal override codes and opened the document. He read it once, his golden eyes moving across each line. Then he read it again, certain he must have misunderstood. But the words didn't change. The truth sat there on the screen, cold and undeniable. He stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. He activated his comm device with shaking hands. "Bring the human to my office. Now." 10 minutes later, Kate stood before him. She was still weak, moving carefully to avoid straining her healing ribs, but she was steady on her feet. The burns on her arms were fading thanks to the regeneration serums, but the scars would remain for weeks. "You lied to me," Draxon said quietly, his voice carrying more hurt than anger. She met his gaze for the first time since awakening in his chambers, and he saw no fear there now. Just tired resignation. "No, Your Majesty," Kate replied. "I never lied. You never asked me the right questions. Your people didn't surrender to the Empire." "No, Your Majesty. We didn't." Draxon gestured to the screen where the treaty document glowed. "Your fleet destroyed 47 of my warships in the first engagement. The Battle of Proxima Station. My military commanders reported it as a minor skirmish with primitive weapons. But this document tells a different story." Kate said nothing, just watched him with those clear brown eyes. "Your weapons technology exceeded ours by at least a century," Draxon continued, his voice growing dangerously soft. "Your ships moved faster than anything we'd ever encountered. Your shields held against our best weapons. You could have fought. You could have won. Instead, you negotiated this arrangement." "Yes, Your Majesty. You sent your people here to be servants. To be tortured in training programs that kill 30% of them. To protect your homeworlds from retaliation. Draxon's claws scraped against the stone desk, leaving deep gouges. You sacrificed thousands of your own people. Yes, Your Majesty. The calmness in her voice was maddening. Draxon pulled up more files, throwing them onto the large display screen. Medical reports. Financial records. Purchase orders for equipment that had nothing to do with training. The overseers have been conducting medical experiments disguised as training, he said, his voice shaking with rage. They're harvesting data on human regeneration capabilities. Your ability to survive injuries that would kill most species. They're studying your pain tolerance, your healing factors, your adaptation to extreme conditions. Then they're selling that data to pharmaceutical companies across the Empire for massive profits. Kate's expression didn't change. They're farming your people, Draxon said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. Torturing them, studying how they survive, and making fortunes from the research. And you're telling me you knew about this? We know, Your Majesty. Those 3 words stopped Draxon cold. He stared at her, searching her face for any sign of surprise or horror. There was none. No, he repeated, barely able to process what she was saying. Every human in the Empire knows, Kate said quietly, her voice steady. We knew before we volunteered to come here. We knew about the training. We knew about the experiments. We knew about the death rate. That's impossible, Draxon breathed. Why would anyone volunteer for that? Kate looked at him for a long moment, and something ancient and sad moved behind her eyes. Because we had no choice, Your Majesty. And because sometimes, survival means enduring the unendurable. Draxon felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, his entire understanding of the past 20 years crumbling. Tell me everything, he commanded. Tell me the truth about what's really happening in my empire. Kate took a slow breath and began to speak. Volunteered. Draxon repeated the word as if tasting poison. His massive frame seemed to shrink slightly as the weight of understanding settled on him. You're saying every human here came willingly? Knowing what would happen to them? Yes, Your Majesty. Kate's voice carried a weight that made the Emperor's scales prickle with unease. She walked slowly toward the window, her movements still careful because of her healing ribs. My husband Michael is on Earth right now. My daughter Anna just turned 6 years old last month. They're safe in our home, playing in the garden, living normal lives. They're safe because I'm here. Because 20,000 humans endure torture in your empire so that 8 billion can live in peace on our worlds. Draxon felt his legs go weak. He sat down heavily in his chair, staring at this small human woman who spoke of sacrifice like it was the most natural thing in the world. He struggled to find words that made sense. That's completely insane. You sent 20,000 people to suffer and die for. That's human, Kate corrected him, cutting off an emperor mid-sentence without fear. She looked out at the palace grounds, at the beautiful gardens where Draxon had found her bleeding just days ago. Do you know what we learned during first contact, Your Majesty? When your ships appeared in our skies and your diplomats came to our world. We learned something interesting about the species in your empire. What did you learn? Draxon asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. We learned that most species in your empire never had to fight for survival on their homeworlds. The Draconis evolved as apex predators. Nothing on your world could challenge you. The Valorians developed under peaceful conditions with abundant resources. The Krell had no natural enemies. Every major species in your empire grew strong without ever truly struggling. Kate's voice was soft but carried absolute certainty. You never had to learn what it means to survive against impossible odds. And humans did? Kate turned to face him, and in her eyes Draxon saw something that made him feel small despite his massive size. We spent 200,000 years surviving on a death world, Your Majesty. We lived through ice ages that covered continents. We fought predators stronger and faster than us. We survived diseases that killed millions. We endured famines, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. We had no natural weapons, no claws, no scales, no venom. We were weak and soft and slow. But you survived, Draxon said quietly. We didn't just survive. We learned to endure what would kill others. We learned to adapt to any condition. We learned that sometimes you can't win by being strong, so you win by refusing to die. Kate's hands gripped the windowsill. So when your empire came with superior ships and weapons and threatened our families, we did what humans do best. Which is, we survived. We played weak. We studied you and learned everything we could. We negotiated from a position that looked like surrender but wasn't. Kate's eyes held something ancient and cold, something that reminded Draxon of predators watching from shadows. And while your overseers tortured us in those training facilities, while they burned us and broke us and studied how long we could survive, we were watching them right back. Every human you've broken has sent information home. Your weapon specifications, your political structure, your economic weaknesses, the locations of your military bases, the patrol patterns of your fleets. Draxon felt ice spreading through his chest. You've been spying. This whole time you've been gathering intelligence. We've been preparing, Kate corrected with quiet intensity. 20 years of data sent home in ways your security never detected. 20 years of your empire thinking we're helpless servants while we learned every secret you have. In 6 more months our new fleet will be ready. Ships built with technology we developed from everything we learned here. Weapons designed specifically to counter yours. And then we'll negotiate again. Real negotiations this time, Your Majesty. Between equals. You used yourselves as bait, Draxon whispered, horror and something like awe mixing in his voice. You weaponized your own suffering. You let us torture you so you could learn from us. Yes, Your Majesty. Because that's what humans do when we're protecting our families. We endure. We adapt. We accept losses that other species would consider unthinkable. We play the long game. Kate's voice softened slightly, losing some of its cold edge. But I told you all this for a reason. You're not like Torvin. When you found me bleeding in your garden, you didn't walk away. You carried me to safety. You used your personal medical supplies to save my life. You actually cared that I was hurt. Of course I cared, Draxon said, surprised at his own vehemence. You were dying. Most of your kind wouldn't have noticed, Your Majesty. Or they would have noticed and not cared. But you did. That means something. That means maybe there's hope for something better than war. The Emperor of 300 Worlds sat in silence, staring at this small, scarred human who had just revealed that his entire empire had been infiltrated by a species everyone thought was conquered. A species that turned victimhood into strategy, that counted its dead as acceptable losses in a war fought with patience instead of weapons. What do you want from me? He finally asked. A choice, Your Majesty. In 6 months my people will come whether you're ready or not. Our new fleet will arrive, and then you'll have to decide between war and peace. But you could change things before then. You could end the torture programs. You could punish the overseers. You could make the Empire something better than it is right now. Draxon looked at Kate, small, scarred, and absolutely unafraid of the most powerful being in 300 star systems. He thought about the burns on her arms, about the 20,000 humans suffering in silence, about the choice that was really no choice at all. And slowly, Emperor Draxon made his decision. The Imperial Guard arrived at dawn. The palace woke to the sound of armored boots marching through marble corridors. Servants pressed themselves against walls as squads of elite guards moved with deadly purpose through every level of the complex. But they weren't coming for the humans. They weren't coming to silence Kate or to cover up what the Emperor had discovered. They came for Overseer Torvin. The arrest happened in his office while he was reviewing the morning reports. He looked up from his desk to find 20 guards surrounding him, their weapons drawn. He tried to invoke his administrative authority, tried to remind them that he was a member of the noble caste. But the guard captain simply handed him a sealed document bearing the Emperor's personal seal. The charges were extensive. Unauthorized medical experimentation. Systematic torture disguised as training. Financial fraud through the sale of illegal research data. Conspiracy to deceive the throne. And murder, hundreds of counts of murder for every human who had died in the conditioning facilities. By midday, every member of Torvin's department who had participated in the programs was in custody. By sunset, the conditioning facilities themselves were demolished. Emperor Draxon watched from his office window as explosives reduced the buildings to rubble. Those structures had stood for 20 years, hiding their secrets behind locked doors and classified reports. Now they were dust. The next morning, Emperor Draxon stood before the Imperial Council and issued a decree that would echo across 300 worlds. His voice was cold and absolute as he spoke. All human servants are hereby granted full citizenship in the Draconis Empire, with all rights and protections afforded to any free person. Any further abuse of humans will be considered treason against the throne, punishable by death. This decree is effective immediately and cannot be revoked by any authority except the Emperor himself. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices. Some nobles protested. Some demanded explanations. Draxon silenced them all with a single look, his golden eyes burning with an authority that brooked no argument. The decree would stand. But Draxon didn't stop there. He did something no Draconis emperor had done in 5 centuries. He contacted Earth directly. the communications took time to establish. Earth's government had hidden itself well over the past 20 years, maintaining the fiction of a defeated, conquered people. But when Draxon sent his message through the proper channels, using codes that Kate had provided, the response came within hours. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. Draxon spoke with Earth's actual leaders, not the puppet administrators his empire had been dealing with. He learned the full scope of what had really happened during first contact. The battles his military commanders had lied about. The technological advantages humanity possessed. The carefully constructed illusion of weakness that had fooled an entire empire. The final treaty was simple but profound. The Draconis Empire would pay reparations for every human who had suffered or died in the conditioning programs. Humanity would share some of their defensive technology in exchange for true peace. And most importantly, both sides would publicly acknowledge the truth that had been hidden for 2 decades. Humanity had never been conquered. They had negotiated a strategic arrangement that both sides chose to honor. The pride it cost Draxon to make that announcement was immeasurable. But he did it anyway, standing before representatives from all 300 worlds and admitting that his empire had been deceived. That humans were not the weak, defeated species everyone believed them to be. When Kate prepared to return to Earth, to finally see Michael and Anna again after years of separation, Emperor Draxon walked with her to the transport bay. It was a gesture that shocked the palace staff, an emperor personally escorting a former servant. But Draxon didn't care what they thought anymore. "Why tell me?" he asked as they walked through the gleaming corridors one final time. "You could have kept silent. You could have let me remain ignorant until your fleet arrived in 6 months. Why risk everything by revealing the truth?" Kate stopped walking and turned to face him. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her answer. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "Because I have a daughter, Your Majesty. Anna is 6 years old and she's growing up in a galaxy at war, even if that war has been invisible. And I want her to grow up in a different kind of galaxy. One where people can change. Where seeing someone hurt can make you want to help them instead of looking away." She smiled, and for the first time since Draxon had met her, it was a real smile. "You cared about a bleeding stranger you found in your garden. You used your personal medicines to save someone you'd been taught to think of as worthless. That's rare, Your Majesty. That kind of compassion is worth preserving, worth fighting for in a different way than we've been fighting. Your people sacrificed so much," Draxon said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. 20,000 of you endured torture so billions could live." "We endured," Kate corrected gently. "That's what humans do. We endure the unbearable, we survive the unsurvivable, and we do it for as long as we have to. But we don't have to anymore. Thanks to you, Your Majesty. Thanks to your choice." She boarded the transport, and Draxon watched it lift into the sky, carrying her home to the family she'd sacrificed everything to protect. Years later, the story became legend across both human and Draconis worlds. Historians called it the turning point, the moment when one emperor's conscience ended a conspiracy and changed the course of 2 civilizations. Universities taught courses about it. Diplomats studied it as an example of how conflicts could be resolved without bloodshed. But those who were there, who had lived through those days, remembered it differently. They remembered a human woman named Kate who had survived torture and still believed that people could change. Who had looked at an emperor and seen not an enemy, but the potential for something better. Who had chosen hope over hatred. And they remembered that sometimes the greatest strength isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, but the courage to turn them into allies instead. That wisdom, patience, and the willingness to endure could win battles that weapons never could. The humans taught the galaxy an important lesson, that the weakest-looking species might be the strongest of all, not because of their weapons or their technology, but because of their unbreakable will to survive and their stubborn refusal to give up hope, even in the darkest moments. That was the real power of humanity, and the galaxy would never forget it.